Magandang araw! April Marcas po, ang inyong pretty ate sa Edtech Unit. Alam ba ninyo na may webinar o online training session ng Edtech Unit tuwing Sabado? Ang araw na ito ay nakalaan para sa ating mga mahal na kaguruan upang turuan sila ng mga bagong kaalaman at kakayahan sa paggamit ng makabagong software at applications para sa pinaka-epektibong paraan at lubos mapaghusay ang kanilang paraan ng pagtuturo. This is also our refresher session for our beloved teachers to enhance their skills in technology. Every Saturday, we will conduct webinar sessions for teachers about the use, advantages, and relevance of different blended learning software applications. Ang webinar seryeng ito ay magsisimula ng alas 9 ng umaga hanggang alas 12 ng tanghali para sa morning session. Magsisimula naman ng alauna at magtatapos ng alas 4 ng hapon ang afternoon session. You can watch us in our DepEd Edtech Unit Facebook page, Educational Technology Unit YouTube channel, DepEd Tayo, and DepEd Philippines. Kita-kits tayo tuwing Sabado!
Magandang araw! Sir Wilbur po, at your service. Narito ang ETUlay upang gabayan ka sa inyong pag-aaral upang lubos na maunawaan ang iba't ibang paksa o subject. Ang ETUlay ay isang free online tutorial class na pinangungunahan ng ICTS Educational Technology Unit sa pamumuno ni Undersecretary Elaine Del B. Pascua. Ang programang ito ay hindi lamang para sa mga bata, kundi ito rin ay magsisilbing gabay sa mga magulang at mga guro kung paano nila ituturo o gagabayan sa bawat asignatura ang kanilang mga anak o mga estudyante. Sa kasalukuyan, ang self-learning module mula sa rehiyon ng Calabarzon at kilala sa tawag na pivot ang ginagamit sa ating ETUlay online class. Kaya ano pang hinihintay ninyo? Ihanda na ang inyong mga ballpen o lapis, papel o kwaderno at samahan kaming itulay ang pagkatuto para sa bawat batang Pilipino. Sama-sama tayong magtutulungan para malampasan ang mga hamon sa panahong ito. Halina't matuto kasama ang inyong online tutor sa oras na ito.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon right now, and we will be together from 4 o'clock until 4:40 in the afternoon with me, Tutor Nova, for today for the subject English for academic and professional purposes for today. Welcome to our ETUlay online tutorial, my senior high school students. All right, so it's a Tuesday for today, and definitely it's English for academic and purposes time. It's from 4 o'clock down till 4:40 today. And this is me, Tutor Nova, at your service for the 40-minute live tutorial for today. So this is quarter 3, week number 6, and we will be talking about the critical approaches in writing a critique. This is a very great topic, especially if you're fond of reading, which I know most of the senior high school students that we have now are definitely huge fan of those literary works and authors as well. Okay, now I got here a picture for you, everyone. I would like you to take a look at this picture right there. I want you to what do you call this one? Look closely on the details that you can see on the picture. I want you to take a look at it and give at least 5 points that you see in the picture. Yeah, just just a brief description about what you see on those pictures. We have a lot of things going on here in the picture. Can you tell me like 5 points that you can see in the picture right there that you can that I have been projecting on the screen? Yeah, just few points there will do. Okay, so as you can see, we got there really happy children. They might be playing, and at the same time, they are definitely outside doing some, I think they're enjoying the nature, right? Most kids do. They do like outside or outdoor activities, and they are actually with nature right here on the picture. Okay, now I'd like you to process the questions that we have for today. Again, by looking at this picture, I want you to try to process these questions. Now, how did you find the picture? Or what can you say about the picture right there that you can see here? Okay, and I guess we have your students joining in the class today. We have Jamie. Hi, Jamie. Thank you for being with us today. Jamie, I'd like you to take a look at this picture right here. And could you tell me at least 5 points that you can see in the picture right here? Yeah. And by doing that, I also like you to process the questions right here. How did you find the picture? Is it something that you can relate? Is it something that you did when you were younger, like 5 or 6 years old? And at the same time, by looking at the picture, are you thinking about the beautiful nature? And what about the location? Like, do you think the location is a really great spot for outdoor activities? And at the same time, did it cross to your mind who is responsible for taking care of the nature? Yeah, it's a very broad area, right? Like, we are surrounded by nature. So who do you think is responsible for taking care of the nature? And what about the feeling of the children playing? What do you think are they feeling at the moment while they were playing outside with nature? And did you ask yourself if you would want to do the same? Like, again, doing this activity right there that you can see on your screen, a picture about 3 children right there. Do you ever wanted to do the same? Okay, and we got here Fritzy joining with us here in the class. Hi, Fritzy. And she said, the picture makes me want to experience the outdoors more often. Yeah, that's right, definitely. And I think when we were kids, we definitely liked doing outdoor activities. And when we reach in a point in our life when we think that we became so busy with the thing now, of course, it's a great way to relieve the stress by being with nature, right? And to be feeling like a kid sometime. That's great. Yeah, being surrounded by nature and be outdoors more often. Okay, now I'd like you to think about this question. What is critique? Did you know that by answering these process questions, these definitely answered these questions by using different approaches. At the same time, these questions right here will lead us how to write a criticism. So again, I'd like to ask you your prior knowledge about a critique. What do you think is a critique, my senior high school students? What comes into your mind when somebody asks you or mentions the word critique? And I think your teachers might have mentioned it to you as well, giving you a task to critique something. All right, so we have Fritz Ursel. Fritzy here says, a critique is a detailed analysis and assessment of something, especially literary, philosophical, or political theory. That's right. That's a bingo. Definitely right, Fritzy. And I think you did a very good research before coming to class. That's good. Okay, so when we say critique, it is a careful analysis of an argument to determine what is said and how well the points are made, what assumptions underlie the argument, and what issues are overlooked, and at the same time, what implications are drawn from such observations. So that is definitely what a critique is. So definitely a lot of things going on when we do critique. We need to consider a lot of things like making assumptions, doing observations, doing implications as well. And that is what a critique is all about. And our discussion for today definitely circulates around doing critique. Okay, so critiques can be used to carefully analyze a variety of work, such as we have here examples like creative works. And when we say creative works, these are what we call the novels, exhibits, film, images, and at the same time, poetry. And we also do critique on research, like the monographs, journal articles, and at the same time, systematic reviews and theories. And we also do a lot of critique on media, like, say, for example, news report or even feature articles. We do that. So like an essay, my senior high school students, a critique at the same time uses formal academic writing style and has a clear structure. Yeah, I bet you remember what the structure of an essay is. It's the IBC, introduction, body, and conclusion. So same with essay. Critique also follows a certain structure, and that is the introduction, body, and conclusion on what we call the IBC. However, the body of a critique includes a summary of the work and a detailed evaluation. So the purpose of an evaluation is to gauge the usefulness or impact of a work in a particular field. So that is what differs, or what we call distinguishes a critique to an essay. Okay, so again, the body of the critique includes a summary of the work and a detailed evaluation. Now, the question is, why? Why do we write critiques? You might also be asking, why do we have to write critiques? Or why do we write critiques? Okay, so writing a critique on a work helps us to develop. Okay, the first thing is that it develops our knowledge of the work's subject area or related works. Because at the same time, when we go back to the meaning of critique, we do a lot of observations and at the same time assumptions, right? So for us to do that, we also need to evaluate the things that actually revolves around the literary work that you are about to critique on. And that will definitely give you a knowledge of the work's subject area or even related work. Okay, now at the same time, writing a critique on a work help us to develop an understanding of the work's purpose, the intended audience, development of argument, structure of evidence, or creative style. So when we do a lot of critiques and at the same time, it actually paves the way to look or scrutinize on the lot of detail that is going on that specific literary work, or it could be on a certain research, or it could be in a news report. So we definitely need to look at the different scope or parts of that work. Okay, so that will definitely give us an understanding of the work's purpose. Okay, lastly, writing a critique on a work help us to develop a recognition of the strengths and weaknesses of the work. Of course, we can definitely weigh in when we do critiquing. It definitely develops our way of weighing whether the work has its strength and definitely also identifying the weaknesses of the work as well. So that, my friends or my senior high school students, are the reasons why we write critique. Now, the question here is how to write a critique. Where do we begin? So the first thing that you need to do is that you need to study the work under discussion. So you need to look at a certain work that you wanted to do your critique on. So at the same time, you can definitely, what we call this one, read about a certain work that you are about to do your critique on. So read a lot, study about it. So study about maybe the author as well as the structures of that certain work, so that you can definitely have your own evaluation or your own understanding about that certain work. And second thing is how to write a critique is you need to make notes on key parts of the work. Because, sometimes we do like critiquing on a certain work that is very long. And when you do that, you need to have your notes so that you will not forget about the key parts of the work. So it is very important to do that. Okay, so never forget to make notes for your reference as well, so that it will be easier for you to do your critique on. Okay, so the third thing that you need to do is you need to develop an understanding of the main argument or purpose being expressed in the work. Okay, so you need to develop that critical understanding. And at the same time, I definitely agree that when you know the purpose of that certain work, it will definitely give you a great idea on what to write or how to write your critique. Okay, now We also got number 4. The step number 4, which is how to write a critique, is that consider how the work relates to a broader issue or context. It could be that, say, for example, if you are writing about a certain situation that happened way back 20 years ago, and how does that relate to a certain issue that we are facing right now in 2021? So definitely you can consider how the work relates to a broader issue or context, like how it is contextualized. So that is how to write a critique. Okay, now this time we will be highlighting on the different approaches in writing a critique. So this will be a lot of things that we will be learning today. So we got here different approaches that will help you to highlight the important details or ideas when you do your critique. So we got here formalist approach on your left part of the screen, and gender criticism approach, and we also have the feminist criticism approach. So let's discuss this one by one. So let's begin with a formalist approach. So when we say formalist approach, this approach actually regards literature as a unique form of human knowledge that needs to be examined on its own terms. So all the elements are actually necessary for understanding the work that are contained within the work itself. So particular interest to the formalistic critique are the elements of form, style, structure, tone, imagery that are found within the text. So a primary goal for a formalistic approach is to determine how such elements work together with the text context to shape its effects upon readers. So once again, you can definitely use the formalist approach if you consider literature as a unique form of human knowledge that needs to be examined on its own terms. So we do that because we wanted to examine the different elements that is surrounded by it, which we know are the form, style, structure, tone, imagery, and a lot of things. As long as it has something to do with literature, we can use the formalist approach. So here are some questions that you can ask when you do your formalistic approach. So first question is that, how is the work structure unified? And second question is, how do various elements of the work reinforce its meaning? And you also got another question you can try to ask is, what recurring patterns, repeated or related words or images can you find? So this is definitely a useful approach when you do what do you call this one? Literary criticism about a certain work of an author, maybe about maybe a poem that an author wrote. So you can do that, trying to evaluate the structure of a certain poem. So you can do the formalistic approach or formalist approach. Okay, next is we have the gender criticism approach. So the gender criticism approach, this approach examines how sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. So originally an offshoot of feminist movements, gender criticism today includes a number of approaches. So we definitely have the masculinist and the feminist approach that is recently an advocate right now. So we do the gender criticism approach if you wanted to examine how sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. So you can do that kind of approach. Now, we also got here our feminist criticism approach. So the feminist criticism approach, this examines images of women and concepts of the feminine in myth and literature as well. So we definitely do this because we attempt to correct the imbalance by analyzing and doing a combat approach in such attitudes by at the same time questioning. Like questioning why none of the characters in Shakespeare's play Othello ever challenged the right of a husband to murder a wife accused of adultery. So we do the feminist criticism approach. If you wanted to really examine the image of women in a certain literary work. And at the same time, we also do that because we often focus on female characters who have been neglected in previous criticism. So, like, say, for example, if you are doing, if you just finished a book, like a chick literature book. So, as you know, the chick literature book, this kind of books or novels are actually circulating a problem. Like if you have read The Confessions of a Shopaholic, it's about a person who is into shopping. So maybe you can do the feminist criticism approach if you wanted to examine the image of women when it comes to myth, at the same time the feminine approach. Okay, so you can try to ask these questions when you do the feminist criticism approach. Is that how are women's lives portrayed in the work? And is the form and content of the work influenced by the writer's gender? So you can also do that by knowing the background of the author or the one who wrote that certain work. And at the same time, you can also ask yourself, how do male and female characters relate to one another? And are these relationships sources of conflict, or are these conflicts resolved? So you can do the feminist criticism approach. Just remember that our keyword is that when we do feminist criticism approach, we wanted to examine images of women and concepts of the feminine in myth and literature as well. Okay, now we also got here more approaches, and we have historical approach and the reader response approach. Now let's get to know these different approaches one by one. Okay, so we begin with, or we continue with the historical approach. So when we say historical approach, it seeks to understand a literary work by investigating the social, cultural, and the intellectual context that produced it. Okay, so this approach at the same time is a context that necessarily includes the artist's biography. And it has also a key goal for historical critiques to understand the effect of a literary work upon its original readers as well. So this is a very good approach if you wanted to know or understand, at the same time investigate the social, cultural, and intellectual context when that certain work was actually produced. Like say, for example, No Limitangere, at the same time El Filibusterismo. So if you have read that book and you wanted to investigate the social, cultural, and intellectual context of it, and relating it to the current social, cultural, intellectual context that we have now in 2021, well, you can do that in the historical approach. So these are some of the questions you can ask yourself if you wanted to do a historical approach. So you can ask, how does it reflect the time when it was written? At the same time, you can also try to ask, how accurately does the story depict the time in which it is set? And lastly, you can ask, what literary or historical influences help to shape the form and content of the work? And this is definitely a great approach when you do criticism or a critique about No Limitangere or El Filibusterismo, or even Mi Ultimo Adios, right? Those kind of writings. Okay, and we also got here the reader response approach. So when you say reader response approach, this exists not as an artifact upon a printed page, but as a transaction between the physical text and the mind of the reader. So when we say reader response approach, this approach takes a fundamental understanding about literature, and it also attempts to describe what happens in the reader's mind while interpreting a text, and reflects that reading, like writing, is a creative process. Oh, this is a very good point, because reading, like writing, is also a creative process, and it's a great thing that you comprehend, or you will definitely try to go beyond the lines about the work that you have read or you wanted to read on. So these will give you the idea that reading is also a creative process by doing the reader response approach. So to describe what happens in the reader's mind while interpreting a text. Okay. Now, next approaches, we have structuralism approach and the sociological approach. Now, let's try to get to know these two approaches. So, we have the structuralism approach. The structuralism approach, this approach focused on how human behavior is determined by social, cultural, and psychological structures. So, when we say structuralism approach, this means to say that things cannot be understood in isolation. It tended to offer a single unified approach to human life that would embrace all disciplines as well. So, my senior high school students, the essence of structuralism is the belief that things cannot be understood in isolation. They have to be seen in the context of larger structures which contain them. So it follows a certain structure. So it focuses on behavior that is identified through social, cultural, and psychological structures. So that is what we call the structuralism approach. Now we got here the sociological approach. When we say sociological approach, this focuses on man's relationship to others in society, politics, religion, and business. So this is sociological approach. Now there are also questions that you can try to ask when you do sociological approach. Like maybe after you have read a certain work and you're thinking about, how about I'll do sociological approach? So these will be your key questions that you can try to ask when you wanted to do sociological approach in a certain literary work that you have just done reading. So we have here, what is the relationship between the characters and their society? And does the story address societal issues such as race, gender, and class? And how do social forces shape the power relationships between groups or classes of people in the story? And at the same time, you can also ask who has the power and who doesn't, and why. So you can do that in a sociological approach. So these are actually the different approaches that you can try when you do your critiques or literary criticisms. Okay, now let's try to go back on the different approaches that we discussed. Again, this is the different approaches you can try to, what do you call this one, use in writing a critique. Again, we have the formalist approach, we have the gender criticism approach, and then we also got the feminist criticism approach. This is actually 7 approaches in total. So again, formalist approach, when you use this approach, this is actually examining literature as a unique form of the human knowledge as well, okay? And at the same time, we have the gender criticism approach. By the way, formalist approach, when we do formalistic approach, you need to examine the literature, like talking about the form, style, tone of a certain literary work, or maybe a poem. And then we have our second approach, which is gender criticism approach. This examines how sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. You can try to examine a certain work about a masculinist, like I think it's kind of an intriguing what it calls one topic about William Shakespeare's Sonnet 14, if you have tried to read about that. So there are actually a lot of criticisms, or a lot of people who wrote their own critique about Sonnet 14, that some of them say that William Shakespeare's Sonnet 14 definitely talks about a certain gender, like masculinity of a certain person. It also questions, I'm not sure if all of the readers also agree to this, but these are some of the things I have read, that the Sonnet 14 of William Shakespeare talks about procreation, right? So when we say Sonnet 14 by William Shakespeare, some of the people who are doing the critique about it definitely talked about the gender or the person that William Shakespeare is talking about in his Sonnet 14. And that's why some of the people who are writing the critique about it, they have said that maybe William Shakespeare's identity is not really a man, or perhaps he has a feminine side. So it's about the gender criticism, definitely talking about the subject of the person, or what we call this one, the main idea of Sonnet 14, of what William Shakespeare is talking about there. Now, we also got here the Feminist Criticism Approach. So always remember that the Feminist Criticism Approach, this examines images of women and concepts of the feminine in myth and literature as well. So you can do the Feminist Criticism Approach if you wanted to examine the different images of women. Like, say, for example, women in the 21st century and women like years ago. So you can do these different concepts, knowing about the different concepts of feminine in myth and literature as well. Okay, now our next approaches, we have historical approach, and we also have here the reader response approach. So let's discuss again the historical approach. When we say historical approach, this definitely seeks to understand a literary work by investigating the social, cultural, and intellectual context that produced it. So when you do critique, like maybe after nyo mag Filipino subject, and then your discussion was about No Limit Tangere, and you were stuck in a certain chapter that your Filipino teacher told you to have a critique on, and then ikaw naman, na wala kang idea how to do a critique. So you just said, well, this chapter is definitely one of the best kasi nalaman na ni Maria Clara kung sino talaga ang kanyang ama. So, well, that's like a very brief judgment or evaluation or a critique about a certain chapter of No Limit Tangere. So, well, you can also try to do the historical approach. So you can do that, especially with those kind of literary works, No Limit Tangere, El Filibusterismo, because you can try to investigate the social, cultural, intellectual context by the time that those works were produced. So you can definitely use the historical approach. Now, next is the reader response approach. Now, when we say reader response approach, it definitely talks about literature exists not as an artifact upon a printed page, but as a transaction between the physical text and the mind of a reader. Well, when we say the reader response approach, this is definitely a great approach to use, especially, when you are reading something, you're just basically reading like the lines, right? But when we do reader response approach, you read beyond the lines. You comprehend the things or the words or maybe the letters that you are reading there in a printed page. It's not just like that. When we do reader response approach, you are not just reading the printed pages as it is. You are not just reading it like, oh, that's just basically words. When we do reader response approach, there is actually a connection or a transaction between those words or the printed text or the physical texts and the mind of a reader. There is a connection between the physical text and the mind of a reader, which means to say, while you are reading something, you definitely comprehend something. And at the same time, you learn from it. And at the same time, you can also have your own understanding about it. And that is reader response approach. So you treat literature not just a piece of something, but you treat literature in a way that it's like having a conversation with a friend, like knowing something that happened years ago, although you were not there, but you felt like you were there. And that is reader response approach. Okay, now, bumalik tayo. Okay, now we got here our last two approaches to complete our 7 approaches. We have the structuralism approach, and we also got here the sociological approach. Again, when we talk about structuralism approach, this focused on how human behavior is determined by social, cultural, and psychological structures. We got here a certain example when we do structuralism approach. If you are familiar with Don's poem, The Good Morrow, this demands more focus on the relevant genre, the concept of courtly love, rather than on the close reading of the formal elements of text. So when we say structuralism approach, it's like you wanted to follow a certain structure in understanding human behavior. So structuralism approach, it definitely gives you an idea to understand human behavior by doing a certain when you do scrutinize analysis about social, cultural, and the psychological structures, it is believed that it's the way to understand human behavior. And that, my senior high school students, when you do that, you're actually doing the structuralism approach. Now, last one is our seventh approach, which is the sociological approach. So again, sociological approach, this focuses on man's relationship to others in society, politics, and religion, at the same time in business. So you can do your sociological approach. Okay, I hope you were able to grasp everything, the different types of approaches you can use when you do literary critiques or literary criticism. I know there's a lot of approaches that we talked about today, but I hope you were able to remember or distinguish the seven approaches among each other. Okay, so I hope you can just absorb everything. Okay, so we got here a lot of students joining in with us in the class. Hi to Gerardine Silvino. And they're actually watching from Rufino A. Cruz Memorial Elementary School from Pulian, Bulacan. Thank you for tuning in with us here. And we also have Flora May Bedicto. Hello. And Rudy Valdez watching from SDO Al Santiago City. Hi, ma'ams and sirs, joining with us today. And at the same time, the senior high school students who are with us today. Thank you for being with me right here. Okay, now let's do our review. Okay, let's see if you were able to really absorb everything about our discussion today. Now, I will be asking you questions. This is only very quick questions, only 5 items that I for sure know you can answer perfectly. Now, let's try. Okay, let's try. Now, I will be asking you questions and just feel free to engage or participate by giving your answers on the comment section. Don't forget to write the number at the same time. Write the letter of your choice so that I'll know if you have put or key in the correct answers here. Okay, this is our first question, my senior high school students. Number 1, this approach regards literature as a unique form of human knowledge that needs to be examined on its own terms. So what do you think is the answer for number 1? Is it letter A, formalist? Or is it letter B, gender criticism? Or is it letter C, historical criticism? Once again, the key word there is a unique form of human knowledge. And also at the same time, this approach definitely would like you to what do you call this one? Examine the tone, style, the imagery of a certain literary work. Now, what is number 1? Okay, we have here Geraldine Sabdao. And she answers letter B, gender criticism. Okay, how about the others? We have here Fritzy. Fritzy here says letter A, formalist. And how about Jose? Jose Pablo is watching from Occidental Mindoro. Hello, thank you for tuning in with us. Okay, and we have J Mar. We have letter A, formalist. So who do you think got the correct answer? Is it letter B or is it letter A? Let's try to find out. That's right, it's letter A. So always remember, formalist approach is regarding literature as a unique form of human knowledge. That is formalist approach. Now let's have number 2. This approach examines how gender criticism, sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. Okay, let's pretend that you cannot see the answer right there. Okay, let's see if you can still get the correct answer though. Again, this approach examines how sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. What do you think is the answer for number 2? Is it letter A, formalist, letter B, gender criticism, or is it letter C, historical criticism? What do you think is the answer for number 2? Oh, okay. We got here Fritzy answers letter B, gender criticism. Wow, very good eyes. How about the others? Do you agree with Fritzy? She answers letter B, gender criticism. Do you have the same answers? Yeah, again, our keyword here is sexual identity. Okay, that is our keyword for number 2 question. Okay, I guess only Fritzy has the guess for today. She says letter B, gender criticism. Now let's try to find out. Number 2 is letter B. It's a bingo. Gender criticism is the right answer. That's right. It examines how sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. Now let's have number 3. Okay, I'm not sure why. There's a typo right there, but let's try. Okay, this approach seeks a literary work by investigating the social, cultural, and intellectual context that produced it. The example for number 3 is like reading about Noli Me Tangere El Filibusterismo, Mi Ultimo Adios. What do you think is the best approach you can use when you do literary critique about those kind of writings? Is it letter A, formalist, letter B, gender criticism, or is it letter C, historical criticism? The correct answer for number 3 is, okay, I think we have a lot of guesses right there. We have letter C for Geraldine, C for Fritzy, and C for the others too. Let's try. That's right. Number 3 is letter C, historical criticism. So always remember that historical criticism investigates the social, cultural, and intellectual context by the time that those writings were produced. Now let's have number 4. It is focused on how human behavior is determined by social, cultural, and psychological structures. What do you think is the answer for number 4? Whew. I think that you can just pretend you cannot see it again. What do you think is the answer for number 4 when we talk about psychological structures? What do you think is the answer for number 4? Okay, we have here Geraldine Sabdao says letter A. She says sociological. Okay, well, let's try to reveal the answer now. Number 4 is letter B, structuralism. Structuralism, again, this focuses on how human behavior is determined by social, cultural, and psychological structures. Okay, and I think we will stop right there because we only have few minutes before we end the class. So how about you, my senior high school students? Did you get a perfect score today? Is it a 4/4? Ooh, I think a lot of participants here answered really good guesses. And I think not just a guess because their answers were all correct. I think you absorbed everything today. So once again, for today's lesson, we talked about the different approaches that you can use when you do your write-up or when you do a literary criticism or a critique. So always remember those 7 approaches. So my senior high school students, our time has come. Our time is over. So thank you so much for being with me today for our 40-minute class for the English for academic and professional purposes. This is Tutor Nova. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again for our next Tuesday class. Bye-bye, and thank you.
Sigurado ako na marami ka na namang natutuhan sa ating ETUlay tutorial session ngayong araw. Tandaan, ito ay hindi lamang para sa ating mga mag-aaral, kundi pati rin sa ating mga minamahal na guro at mga magulang na kaagapay natin para maituloy ang pagkatuto sa kabila ng nararanasang pandemya. Patuloy ding sumubaybay sa DepEd TV para sa mga araling ginawang video episodes. Mapapanood ito mula Lunes hanggang Sabado, alas 7 ng umaga hanggang alas 7 ng gabi sa inyong mga telebisyon. Abangan bukas mula 1:00 ng tanghali ang iba pang aralin sa ating ETUlay free online tutorial session sa Filipino. I-like and subscribe at manatiling nakasubaybay sa ating ETUlay tutorial session sa DepEd Edtech Unit FB page at Educational Technology Unit channel sa YouTube at sa DepEd Tayo at DepEd Philippines social media accounts. Paalam!